In this video, I'm going to explain how the comic book market is a scam, and it is based off of an economic theory, but probably not what you're thinking. This may make some people upset, but the truth is the truth, and as new people come into the hobby and even on this platform, I want to be clear. Well, some of these comic book sellers don't know what they're talking about, and I'm going to explain it in full detail. Now, I don't want this to be a class in economics, but I do have to explain what value is. And value can be simply broken into two categories for the sake of this video. One, intrinsic value. These are things like gold, silver, diamonds, rare gems, even copper. Things along those lines that have a built-in value to them. The only reason why the price of these things fluctuate is because the currency to purchase them fluctuates. The other one is instrumental value. These are things like hammers, wrenches, things that can produce a service or a product that will make somebody money, currency at the end of the day. And the only reason why these prices fluctuate is because of the demand of the market overall. This is going to be important because comic books do not fit in either one of these two. So now let me introduce you to the greater fool economics. This is an economic theory that describes asset bubbles and speculative investing, or assumption investing really in this case. The basic premise is that an asset price is not based on its intrinsic or instrumental value, but rather the assumption that it can be sold to even a greater fool. That's where the term comes in. For a higher price in the future. This dynamic plays out vividly in the comic book market, which has multiple examples of booms and bust cycles over the last few decades. Let's use an example of a vintage comic book to illustrate greater fool economics in action. What kicked off this entire cycle was in the 80s and 90s, comic books, especially rare or so-called valuable issues, became highly sought after by collectors based off of an emotional response and nostalgia to these particular books. So investors or speculators drove up the price of classic comic books like Action Comics #1, which saw a huge boom. This was the first appearance of Superman, and Amazing Fantasies 15, the first appearance of Spider-Man. The logic behind the buying frenzy was not based on an intrinsic or instrumental value of the comic books themselves. After all, these were just mass-produced paper goods. Rather, the buyers believed that they could sell the comic to an even greater fool down the line for a higher price, as long as a steady of new stream investors were eager to get in on the action and follow the same example. The price could continue to rise over a period of time. Eventually, the pool of new investors dried up, meaning that it didn't go out into a mainstream market. It was rather niched. After it dries up, the demand for the vintage comic plummeted. Prices crashed, leaving speculators and the so-called investors holding worthless assets. This is important to call it an asset at this point, because there's zero value to it, but yet people are dumping currency into it. This is the classic pattern of a greater fool bubble. We've seen this before in housing markets and things along those lines. When the greater fool stops showing up, the bubble pops. Many comic book shops, especially specialty retailers, online sales, things along those lines, went out of business and the market absolutely collapsed. But now we're seeing a resurgence in it and a bunch of people saying terms and using verbiage that they don't quite understand. Collectors who had bought comic books as an investment rather than their love for the medium found themselves with piles of worthless paper at the end of the day. It should also be noted that the same economic theory was used in cryptocurrency scams, NFT scams, and really any type of pump and dump action where hype overrides logic. Now here's where things get really, really bad. And that's when you use the greater fool economic theory and you add manipulation and outright lying to it. The first type of manipulation I want to address is this whole sourcing your data and data points. What most people do when they try to sell these comic books to inflate them is they'll go to one source, eBay. And what they'll do is they'll go into eBay and they'll find 6 listings of a comic book that sold. And then they take that and make an average determination from it. The problem with this is that that's not 6 points of proof that the comic book can be sold at that price. You went to one source of data. You went to eBay. Doesn't Whatnot sell comic books? Facebook Marketplace, local comic book shops. They purposely choose this one place and add other data points into it to make it seem like they've done some sort of research on it. And in fact, they didn't. Because everything's going to sell around the same average price in 6 months unless they're hyping up the comic book, which we've already talked about. It's just a scam in itself. Next, we can talk about the data points that they pull. If you take a look at this comic book right here, you'll see this line driven through it, and you'll see the words best offer accepted. What a lot of the top 10 list out there for comics selling at these exorbitant prices still add this number of 11,800, but in fact we have no idea what the comic book actually sold for. It's just outright dishonest. Now let's talk about fair market value. This is based off of 10 different points, so I want to say thank you if you've been watching this long, and I understand if you want to leave. But this is where the greatest amount of manipulation actually happens, and I'm going to break down each point for you. So again, thank you for staying this long. The first one I want to talk about is supply and demand. This is highly misunderstood. Supply and demand is nothing more than the balance between the availability of an item and the desire for it. However, it does not address the means of production. So if a comic book shop or an individual wants to put out a limited 500 run, well, there's nothing stopping them from creating more of those copies. They purposely limit it to 500 so they can raise the price up beyond anything that would be a fair market value. It's a classic manipulation tactic in the comic book industry that honestly needs to be put a stop to. This also happens with ratio variance and everything else. It doesn't make any economic sense. If you can push it out in volume, you'll make more money. A great example of this would be like McDonald's makes more money off of hamburgers than your local artisan hamburger shop because it sells in a volume versus a niche clientele. They're just doing quick cash grabs. That's it. This one's kind of interesting because you kind of have to peel back the onion a little bit. And it's called the willing buyer and seller. This means that both parties should be knowledgeable about the asset and acting in their own best interest, not each other's, and this should happen without any outside pressures. Buying a comic book at a Comic-Con immediately deflates this. There's no fair market value at a Comic-Con. The reason being is because the bottom line, the Comic-Con setting up booths at them are extremely expensive, which means that that person needs to meet their cost at the end of the day. So things are generally sold at a premium when it's up on the wall. Yes, they make the onesies and twosies from the dollar bins and things like that, but anything that would be considered valuable, which is an outright lie, has to be sold at a premium, and this is not good. This is also done on YouTube and Instagram too, to express some sort of authoritative argument, meaning the person is an expert, they're able to evaluate this thing as value. Oh, and this is a good one. Open market condition. The item should be exposed to the market for a reasonable time period. This is manipulated by the simple fact that a trailer drops for a movie, and before the movie comes out, the sales of the first appearance of this particular character or cameo appearance, which really isn't a thing, boost the sales of the comic. This is a classic manipulation technique to let you think that before the movie comes out, you need to buy that comic book because the value of it is going to skyrocket. When the truth is, when the movie gets released, and it's really bad, and nobody liked it, the value of the comic book actually crashes. It's one of the greatest techniques of crashing and bubbling a market out there that is still used. The next one is comparable sales. Recent sales of similar items with an S can indicate a fair market value. We've kind of already covered this with how they already manipulate the data to begin with when they see a comic book that's selling for but don't know what it actually sold for. This is just outright. I cannot find 3 people to agree on the price of a comic book in a secondary market. Nowhere on YouTube. The next one's kind of weird, and it's a little bit of a fancier way to manipulate a market. It's current economic conditions. Overall economic health, interest rates, and inflation can affect value of things. Where this happens is when somebody tells you that because there's a recession going on, that they drop the price. Again, if we go back and look at the data points, we find out that it's really not that significant at all. The next one is unique features or attributes, special characteristics that might increase or decrease the value. This is where people will manipulate the words that they use. This is the difference between a cameo appearance versus a full appearance, or even a brief appearance, or slapping it in plastic and putting a label on it, or having a signature put on it. None of this stuff increases value because the initial item had no value to begin with. And it doesn't make it any more rare or unique if you calculate how many Comic Cons happen and how many people sign comic books. It's just a manipulation tactic. Ooh, here's a good one that will really upset some people. Fair market value also takes into account condition and quality, the state of the item compared to others like it. Yeah, we're talking about grading comics. I'll be honest with you, I don't really understand the expertise behind going through a check sheet and checking something. If I look at a doctor and I find a specialist involved in it, that's years of training, reputation, yada yada yada. The problem is that people that grade comic books can literally learn the entire thing in a week, and then at that point, most people still disagree with the grade that they get back, recrack the slab, and then submit it, and somehow or another it changes. You can get out of here with that. It is absolutely manipulation at the end of the day. Next is the one that I think most people kind of fall victim to. It's the future earnings potential, meaning what is it worth in the future, kind of based off of the whole greater fool theory. This is interesting. For investment or businesses project returns that will ultimately influence a fair market value. And people associate this with the comic book. It's how the comic book greater fool theory actually works. You buy the comic books at a low price, and sometime down the line it will be worth more. Well, let's take a look at a comic book that has done this. Action Comics #1, right? First appearance of Superman. It took 80 years. 80 plus years. So if you plan on buying the comic book and holding it for your future grandchildren, if not great-grandchildren, depending on your age, then yeah, it doesn't really fit in that market either. That's a long time just to be holding on to a paper asset. Hope you got it slabbed, I guess. Now, just to be accurate, I'm going to mention the next two, even though they don't really fall into it, but I do see some manipulation happen here too. One is legal and regulatory environment. Laws and regulations can impact the value of an item, of course. And then next is, of course, expert appraisal. Professional assessment often play a role in determining the fair market value, especially for unique and high-value items. This one is a little bit more interesting. I've noticed I haven't seen anybody in the YouTube space or even Instagram space sit there and call themselves an expert appraisal in this stuff. And I would be very careful if you use that as a technique, because with expertise comes credentials. And a great valuation of this would be to call up your local insurance company to have a comic book collection evaluated, or even see if you can, how much of a loan you could take out against a comic book collection, meaning value can be leveraged. It would be a great example to show people that your comic books really aren't worth as much as you think they are if they can't be leveraged for other things of value. So that kind of covers the whole fair market value thing. And again, I apologize if that took too long. I know people like their shorter videos, but I'm not trying to make a whole lot of videos for this. With that said, let's talk about some of these ridiculous cliches people use. The first one is pretty simple. Buy what you love. I don't understand this. Have you not bought something that in the moment of heat and passion and availability, you went ahead and you bought it, and after a period of time, it just kind of sat there in a drawer someplace? Like, at first you loved it, sure, but where did it end up, and did it have any value? Also, you'll notice that when I gave evaluations and fair market value, that there was no reference to a feeling or a belief. Another one that I often hear is a comic is worth what you paid for it, and that's just an absolute, outright, ridiculous cliche. As a matter of fact, I'm going to use a cliche that actually spawned from the greater fool theory, and that a fool and his money are quickly separated. Now, I know this video may bring out some heat, may even anger some people. So allow me to address a few of the common fallacy arguments against this video. The first one I want to address is the argument of authority. This is the individual that will try to say something to the effect of, I've been selling and trading comic books for 20 years and I can tell you that this is absolutely 100% wrong. Well, the problem with this argument is, one, nobody sees you as an authority, and if they do, by all means, introduce me to them. Second of all, if you've done something wrong for 19 years, it doesn't all of a sudden become right on the 20th year. And the next one I want to address is this kind of weird redefining of verbiage out there. I know for a fact that my comic book's a blue chip comic book. No, it's not. And nobody that deals in economics, value, banking, or anything with money would agree with you on this, because it's not a blue chip. In other words, as I said before, you cannot leverage it for anything other than currency at the end of the day. And that's just a fallacy argument in itself. Also, the redefining of terms also fits when somebody says, like I said before, cameo appearance versus first appearance. Again, this is just redefining of verbiage, and I don't find that argument valid in any way. Why make this video is another argument. The reason why I made this video is because over the years I have been surfing the algorithms of YouTube and watching a lot of you over the years. I've seen this get straight up out of control, and they're using the same techniques and tactics that were often used in things that we've already confirmed as scams. These NFTs, cryptocurrencies, and to-the-moon BS. And the truth is, those same tactics are being used against people who are being emotionally driven to make a value proposition when those two things are not made together. The truth is, if you all want these comic books, by all means, buy them. But do not go into credit card debt or lose money or even pay more than you actually should. And that's ultimately what's happening in these fictitious markets that are happening right now. And I just can't stand by and watch good people in the comic book community get the rug pulled out from underneath them under these kind of weird pump and dump. You got it, you're super happy, and then it just sits in a box for years on end. Definitely read these things. Give them to people. Save them for your grandchildren for the next 80 years, whatever the case may be. But do it smartly. Don't be the next greater fool. Well, that's going to wrap this one up. Please consider checking out some of my other videos, and please don't forget, I'm Blink AI, your comic book community host. And thank you for watching.